In medicine, survival is usually predictable. The body stops working in known sequences, blood loss beyond a certain percentage leads to shock, brain cells begin dying after several minutes without oxygen, core temperature falling too low shuts down the heart. These thresholds exist because human physiology depends on delicate chemical balances, and when those balances collapse, life normally ends. Yet scattered throughout medical records are cases that refuse to follow these rules. They do not bend the limits, they erase them. A rescue team once reached a frozen accident victim who had been trapped under ice water far longer than the brain should tolerate oxygen deprivation. The skin was pale blue, the pupils did not react. No measurable pulse could be found for a long time. By all known standards, the body had already crossed the boundary between clinical death and biological death. The difference matters. Clinical death means circulation has stopped. Biological death means the cells themselves have begun irreversibly failing. The assumption at the scene was simple. Recovery was impossible. Yet, during transport, something unusual guided the medical response. Instead of declaring death immediately, the responders maintained slow warming and continuous resuscitation. Hours passed. Then electrical activity appeared in the heart. Later, the brain resumed function. Eventually, the patient regained consciousness with minimal neurological damage. The explanation was not luck, it was physics. Extreme cold had slowed metabolism so drastically that oxygen demand collapsed. The brain had not survived without oxygen. It had survived with almost no need for it. This phenomenon has appeared repeatedly across different climates and decades. Individuals submerged in freezing water sometimes recover after periods far beyond the expected survival window. The cold essentially pauses biochemical time. At low temperatures, destructive reactions inside cells slow down, buying minutes that turn into hours. In controlled surgical settings, doctors now intentionally cool patients to protect the brain during certain procedures. What began as an anomaly became a medical technique. The body contains emergency states rarely activated in modern life. Another case involved vertical distance rather than temperature. A fall from extreme height should produce predictable outcomes. Impact forces increase exponentially. Bones fracture, organs rupture. The brain decelerates against the skull. Survival probabilities rapidly approach zero beyond certain heights. Yet, occasionally someone walks away. One widely studied accident involved a fall that should have produced immediate fatal trauma. Instead, the victim remained conscious and mobile long enough to reach assistance. Imaging later revealed multiple fractures, but not the catastrophic internal injuries expected. The explanation was not superhuman toughness, it was distribution of force. Human survival is not only about magnitude of damage, but the pathway energy takes through tissue. When impact disperses across structural axes, the skeleton can temporarily behave like a compression frame. Under rare conditions, the body converts lethal acceleration into survivable mechanical load. This is not strength, it is geometry. The skeleton evolved to manage repetitive running stress. not falls from altitude. But the same alignment that supports endurance movement occasionally channels impact away from vital organs. These events are statistical outliers, yet they appear consistently enough to demonstrate that the margin between life and death is broader than expected. Fire presents another threshold, long believed absolute. Extensive burns disrupt skin, the primary barrier controlling temperature and infection. Historically, large surface burns almost always resulted in fatal complications due to fluid loss and sepsis. Then, medicine encountered survivors whose injuries exceeded predicted fatal percentages. In certain rare cases, aggressive treatment combined with the body's inflammatory response stabilized circulation long enough for tissue regeneration. Skin grafting, once considered experimental, became viable because patients remained alive beyond the initial shock phase. The body's immune and repair systems can escalate to emergency operation modes rarely triggered in normal injury. Massive hormonal responses increase clotting, shift blood flow to essential organs, and alter metabolism to preserve energy. These reactions are dangerous and often harmful long-term, yet they extend immediate survival. The body does not attempt comfort. It attempts continuation. Radiation exposure once seemed similarly deterministic. High doses destroy dividing cells, especially bone marrow and intestinal lining. The expectation was simple. Beyond a certain exposure, survival was biologically impossible. Yet, a small number of individuals survived doses previously believed universally fatal. Their recovery was slow and incomplete, but survival itself forced a revision of the dose-response model. Genetic variation in cellular repair mechanisms allows some bodies to repair DNA damage more effectively than others. Human resilience is not uniform. It exists on a spectrum wider than average biology suggests. The common thread across these cases is not miracle recovery. It is the activation of latent states built into human physiology. Under normal conditions, the body prioritizes efficiency and stability. Under extreme threat, it abandons efficiency and becomes a preservation machine. Blood vessels constrict to maintain pressure to the brain and heart. Known essential functions shut down. Metabolism reconfigures. Hormonal cascades override normal regulation. These processes are costly and can leave permanent damage, but they extend the time available for rescue or recovery. Evolution did not optimize humans for perfect health. It optimized them for survival during unpredictable catastrophe. Ancient environments contained hazards far more sudden than modern daily life. Ice storms, predator attacks, starvation, and falls during pursuit hunting were not rare events. Individuals capable of entering emergency survival states gained enough additional time to escape or receive group assistance. Over generations, the ability to temporarily operate outside normal physiological limits became embedded in the species. Most people never experience these states because they require severe threat. When they do appear, they seem supernatural because they contrast sharply with ordinary bodily behavior. Medical science continues to discover that the line between reversible and irreversible damage depends not only on injury severity, but on context, temperature, metabolic rate, genetics, and the timing of intervention. Death, in many cases, is not a moment. It is a process with variable speed. The humans who should have died did not violate biology. They revealed parts of it rarely seen. In emergency medicine, there is a phrase repeated quietly among experienced responders: "No one is dead until they are warm and dead." The statement sounds paradoxical, yet it exists because the body does not shut down uniformly under certain conditions. Biological time stretches. The cascade toward irreversible failure slows, pauses, or changes direction. The heart is normally considered the final authority of life. When electrical activity stops, circulation stops. Without circulation, oxygen delivery ends and the brain rapidly deteriorates. The window for resuscitation is typically counted in minutes. Past that point, neurological recovery becomes unlikely. However, some cases force doctors to redefine what past that point means. During severe hypothermia, the heart may enter rhythms too slow to detect by touch or basic monitoring. Electrical impulses become faint, irregular, almost indistinguishable from silence. In warmer conditions, this would represent cardiac arrest. In deep cold, it may represent suspended function. Cells consume energy at a fraction of their normal rate, allowing tissues to endure long interruptions in circulation. Rescuers who once declared death based on absent pulse now rely on temperature measurement before making conclusions. Patients have regained heartbeat after prolonged resuscitation efforts simply because cooling preserved cellular integrity long enough for reactivation. The brain behaves similarly. Neurons depend on continuous energy supply, but their vulnerability changes with metabolic demand. Lower temperature reduces destructive chemical reactions, slows swelling, and delays toxic buildup inside cells. Instead of dying quickly, neurons wait. The delay can be long enough for intervention to succeed. This has altered resuscitation philosophy. Persistence matters. Another boundary once thought absolute was blood loss. Circulatory shock occurs when volume drops too low to maintain pressure. Organs fail as perfusion declines. Historically, survival beyond certain blood loss percentages was rare. Yet, trauma care has recorded individuals surviving massive hemorrhage followed by recovery. The key lies in the body's capacity to redistribute resources. During extreme blood loss, vessels in skin and limbs constrict dramatically, prioritizing flow to brain and heart. Heart rate accelerates. Hormones stimulate clot formation and reduce kidney filtration to conserve fluid. For a short time, the body converts itself into a minimal life support system. This state is unstable and cannot last indefinitely. Without medical support, it collapses. But it extends survival long enough for transfusion or surgery. The difference between fatal and survivable injury becomes measured not only in damage, but in minutes gained. There are also cases where trauma disrupts consciousness, yet preserves coordinated action. Individuals have performed complex behaviors after severe injury with no later memory of doing so. From a neurological standpoint, this reveals layered brain function. Higher awareness can fail while motor programs continue operating. The brain contains older circuits designed for immediate escape and protection. When the conscious mind shuts down, these systems can temporarily control behavior. People have walked, called for help, or moved to safety despite injuries that should have incapacitated them instantly. It is not willpower. It is automatic survival architecture. Temperature, circulation, and neural control all show that the body contains emergency configurations separate from normal living conditions. These configurations are inefficient and dangerous, but optimized for short-term continuation. Another dramatic example involves pressure rather than cold or trauma. Rapid decompression at altitude can cause gas expansion in tissues, oxygen deprivation, and loss of consciousness. The expectation is rapid incapacitation. Yet pilots and high-altitude survivors sometimes retain purposeful action for longer than predicted. Short bursts of preserved cognition occur because the brain prioritizes essential motor patterns even while higher reasoning declines. Actions like pulling a lever or activating equipment may occur in the narrow margin before blackout. Evolution favored even brief preservation of action because a few seconds could mean escape from environmental threat. Survival is often measured in moments rather than minutes. Radiation cases also demonstrate gradual thresholds instead of sharp boundaries. Cellular damage accumulates, but repair mechanisms attempt correction. Some individuals experience severe acute symptoms, yet recover partially as stem cells regenerate tissue. Variability in DNA repair efficiency creates wide differences in outcome after similar exposures. These differences are not visible externally. Two people can appear identical, yet possess drastically different tolerances to extreme stress. This hidden variability explains why survival statistics describe populations but never guarantee individual outcome. Medicine operates on averages. Biology operates on possibilities. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that many lethal processes are reversible early on. Cardiac arrest can sometimes be restarted. Hypothermic brain inactivity can reverse. Shock can stabilize. The transition from life to death is rarely instantaneous. It is a narrowing corridor where intervention may still change direction. Understanding this has reshaped emergency protocols. Longer resuscitation attempts, controlled rewarming, and aggressive supportive care exist because past anomalies proved recovery can occur beyond expectations. The extreme survivors did not merely endure accidents. They exposed protective mechanisms embedded deep within human physiology. These mechanisms evolved in environments where immediate rescue was uncertain and endurance against sudden catastrophe determined survival. Modern life hides these capacities. Safety systems, stable climates, and rapid medical care prevent most people from ever reaching biological limits. Yet the limits remain present, waiting only for conditions severe enough to activate them. Human life persists not because the body avoids failure, but because it delays it. The people who should have died demonstrate that survival is less a fixed boundary and more a race between damage and response. Sometimes the response, ancient and automatic, is just fast enough. Oxygen is treated as the most immediate requirement for life. Without food, the body lasts weeks. Without water, days. Without oxygen, only minutes. The brain in particular depends on constant supply because it consumes a disproportionate amount of the body's energy. Neurons do not store fuel. They rely on uninterrupted delivery through the bloodstream. When circulation stops, electrical activity collapses rapidly and damage begins. Yet the exact timing of this collapse is less fixed than once believed. In controlled laboratory conditions, loss of consciousness from oxygen deprivation occurs quickly, but outside controlled conditions, the body sometimes activates a response inherited from aquatic mammals. This reaction, called the diving reflex, alters circulation and metabolism when the face contacts cold water and breathing stops. Heart rate slows, blood vessels in limbs constrict. Oxygen is redirected toward the brain and heart. Metabolic demand decreases. The body behaves as though conserving air for a prolonged submersion. This reflex exists in all humans, but varies in strength. In rare cases, it becomes powerful enough to extend survival well beyond predicted limits. Freedivers intentionally train to exploit this reaction. Unlike scuba divers who carry compressed air, freedivers descend holding a single breath. Depth compresses the lungs and pressure increases dramatically with every meter. Oxygen saturation drops steadily, carbon dioxide rises, creating an intense urge to breathe. Ordinarily, this urge forces inhalation before dangerous oxygen depletion occurs. However, the urge is driven primarily by carbon dioxide buildup, not oxygen absence. By training tolerance to carbon dioxide discomfort, divers delay the reflex to breathe while oxygen levels continue falling. This creates a paradox. A diver can feel calm while approaching unconsciousness. Some divers have remained submerged for durations once thought incompatible with human survival. Monitoring has shown the body reducing peripheral blood flow and even allowing small portions of lung collapse to minimize nitrogen absorption. The spleen contracts, releasing stored red blood cells to increase oxygen carrying capacity. These changes are automatic, not conscious. The body shifts from terrestrial mode to aquatic survival mode. Accidental submersions sometimes trigger the same processes. Children in cold water have been recovered after extended periods with preserved neurological function. The cold enhances the diving reflex and lowers metabolic demand simultaneously. Oxygen consumption drops to a fraction of normal levels. The brain survives because its requirements temporarily shrink. Not every case ends in recovery, but enough do that rescue protocols now continue resuscitation far longer than before in cold, drowning incidents. Avalanche burials demonstrate a related phenomenon. Victims trapped beneath snow often inhale a small air pocket before airflow stops. Oxygen declines while carbon dioxide rises. Normally, this leads quickly to suffocation. Yet, in certain cases, slow cooling and reduced movement lower metabolism. Survivors have been recovered after durations exceeding expected tolerance. Their bodies did not obtain more oxygen, they used less. At high altitude, the opposite challenge appears. Oxygen is present but scarce. Climbers ascending extreme mountains experience progressive deprivation. The brain struggles to function, judgment deteriorates. Eventually, loss of consciousness occurs if descent or supplemental oxygen is not provided. However, populations living permanently at altitude display a different pattern. Over generations, their bodies altered oxygen handling. They breathe more efficiently, maintain circulation differently, and in some regions possess hemoglobin variations improving oxygen delivery. What is striking is that short-term exposure and lifelong adaptation activate overlapping mechanisms. Even unacclimatized individuals temporarily increase breathing rate and produce more red blood cells after days at altitude. The body attempts to compensate for low oxygen availability using hormonal signaling and gene expression changes. Oxygen dependence is flexible within limits. Medical emergencies sometimes mimic these environmental challenges. During cardiac arrest, circulation stops completely. Standard expectation predicts irreversible brain damage after several minutes. Yet, rapid cooling or immediate resuscitation efforts occasionally preserve function longer than anticipated. The explanation lies in energy management. Neurons fail when energy reserves deplete. Cooling, reduced activity, and redirected circulation slow depletion. The difference between recovery and permanent injury may be measured in small reductions of metabolic demand. Carbon dioxide tolerance also plays a role. Rising carbon dioxide creates panic and involuntary breathing attempts. In situations where breathing is impossible, panic accelerates oxygen consumption through muscle activity. Individuals who remain still and conserve movement extend survival time, often without consciously understanding why. The body's reactions are shaped by ancient survival contexts. Early humans frequently crossed rivers, hunted near water, and faced sudden immersion. A reflex that prolonged breath-holding increased survival odds. Over thousands of generations, this reflex remained, even as daily life rarely required it. Modern physiology textbooks once described oxygen deprivation using rigid timelines. Field experience forced revision. The outcome depends on temperature, activity, genetics, and immediate response. Breathing appears simple but involves complex prioritization. The brainstem monitors carbon dioxide more aggressively than oxygen because carbon dioxide changes acidity rapidly, threatening cellular stability. Oxygen shortage becomes dangerous quietly. This mismatch explains why individuals can lose consciousness without warning during severe deprivation. Extreme survival cases reveal that the body's primary goal is not comfort or awareness, it is preservation of critical tissue until conditions improve. The absence of oxygen does not always end life immediately. Sometimes it initiates a transition into a protective state where the body spends its remaining resources carefully waiting for the environment to change. The most dangerous moment during oxygen deprivation is often not when oxygen disappears, but when it returns. When tissues have been starved of oxygen, their internal chemistry shifts. Cells switch from efficient aerobic metabolism to emergency anaerobic processes. Energy production drops sharply, acids accumulate, and protective mechanisms slow activity to conserve remaining fuel. If oxygen suddenly floods back in uncontrolled amounts, damaged cells release reactive molecules that cause additional injury. This is known as reperfusion damage. In other words, survival is not only about enduring the absence of oxygen, it is about surviving its restoration. Rescue teams treating drowning victims or cardiac arrest patients now manage reoxygenation carefully. Gradual stabilization improves neurological outcome. The body must be guided back to normal function instead of abruptly forced into it. These medical practices emerged after observing survivors who recovered better when rewarming and oxygen delivery were controlled. The body transitions through states rather than flipping a switch. Free divers unknowingly train for this balance. After long submersions, they surface slowly, allowing circulation and breathing to normalize. Rapid hyperventilation or panic movements can cause sudden oxygen shifts, leading to blackout near the surface, a phenomenon called shallow water loss of consciousness. Oxygen levels drop critically low, while carbon dioxide remains suppressed, removing the urge to breathe. The brain shuts down quietly. This reveals a crucial principle. Awareness is not a reliable indicator of safety. The brain preserves function until a threshold is crossed, then stops abruptly. Many individuals experiencing oxygen deprivation report calmness shortly before losing consciousness. The protective reflex reduces distress, preventing frantic activity that would accelerate oxygen use. Avalanche survivors provide another illustration. When buried, movement compresses the air pocket and increases carbon dioxide accumulation. Stillness, though psychologically difficult, extends survival. Some rescued individuals later described an unexpected sense of detachment or reduced panic as oxygen declined. Neurochemical changes alter perception, dampening fear responses. The brain chooses conservation over alarm when resources vanish. In surgical medicine, controlled oxygen deprivation has even been used intentionally. During certain cardiac and neurological procedures, circulation is temporarily stopped while the body is cooled dramatically. This technique, called deep hypothermic circulatory arrest, allows surgeons to operate in bloodless fields for limited periods. The brain tolerates the interruption because metabolic demand is minimized. What once appeared as miraculous survival became a predictable outcome when conditions were replicated. Newborn mammals display particularly strong oxygen conservation reflexes. Human infants, submerged briefly in water, instinctively hold breath and reduce movement. This reflex fades with age, but never disappears entirely. Adults retain a weaker version, activated under sudden immersion or facial cooling. These patterns suggest evolutionary inheritance from ancestors who regularly encountered water hazards. Even species that live on land carry physiological echoes of aquatic survival strategies. High-altitude adaptation further demonstrates oxygen flexibility. When exposed to thin air, the kidneys release hormones stimulating red blood cell production. Blood thickens, increasing oxygen transport, but also strain on the heart. Over weeks, breathing patterns adjust, and cellular machinery alters how oxygen is used inside mitochondria. Some populations developed long-term genetic solutions. Their bodies avoid excessive red blood cell production and instead optimize circulation efficiency. Others increase lung capacity. Different evolutionary paths reach the same goal: sustaining brain function with less oxygen. This diversity shows the human species is not optimized for one environment. It is adaptable across many. The most revealing discoveries come from monitoring brain activity during deprivation. Electrical patterns slow progressively rather than ceasing instantly. Communication between regions diminishes, prioritizing essential functions. Sensory processing fades first, complex reasoning next, and finally, basic regulatory centers. The brain sheds functions in order of importance. This hierarchy explains reports from survivors who experienced tunnel vision, fading hearing, or distorted time perception before blackout. These are not random sensations, but stages of energy conservation. The brain maintains consciousness as long as possible, but when energy becomes insufficient, awareness is sacrificed to protect core survival centers. Oxygen deprivation exposes the brain's priorities. Thought, memory, and perception are expendable. Heartbeat regulation and breathing reflexes are not. Medical research now explores whether inducing similar protective states could improve trauma survival. If metabolism can be safely reduced after severe injury, tissues might endure longer without permanent damage. The concept mirrors natural responses seen in hypothermia and diving reflex activation. Human survival is therefore not simply about oxygen supply. It is about energy management. The body can temporarily reconfigure itself into a low-consumption system, extending viability during crisis. This transformation is rarely noticed in daily life because conditions never require it. But when they do, the change is dramatic. The absence of oxygen does not immediately destroy life. It initiates a countdown whose speed depends on how efficiently the body enters preservation mode. Some individuals enter that mode faster or more completely than others. Those who survive the longest without air reveal that humans are not fragile in the way ordinary experience suggests. They are organisms capable of pausing themselves, waiting in silence until breathing becomes possible again. Pain is supposed to stop movement. Under normal circumstances, it functions as a protective alarm. A fractured bone prevents weight-bearing. A deep cut forces withdrawal. Severe injury overwhelms attention, so the body rests and damage does not worsen. From a medical perspective, this response is logical. Limiting activity reduces bleeding, prevents further trauma, and allows healing to begin. Yet, in extreme emergencies, the opposite sometimes occurs. There are documented cases where individuals continued coordinated action despite injuries that should have immobilized them instantly. People have walked on shattered limbs, lifted heavy debris after severe trauma, or traveled significant distances before collapsing. Only later did the full extent of damage become apparent. The body did not ignore injury. It temporarily changed its priorities. At the center of this response is the brain's threat processing system. When sudden danger appears, the nervous system releases a surge of stress hormones, including adrenaline and noradrenaline. These chemicals alter perception, circulation, and attention within seconds. Blood shifts toward major muscles. Heart rate accelerates. Pain signals are suppressed before reaching conscious awareness. This is not a psychological choice. It is a neurological override. Pain perception requires processing in higher brain regions. During immediate survival situations, lower brain centers bypass those regions and activate motor programs directly. The goal is escape, not comfort. The brain assumes that stopping to experience injury would reduce survival probability. As a result, individuals can perform actions normally impossible under calm conditions. One well-studied phenomenon involves temporary strength increases during emergencies. Muscles are always capable of greater force than typically used, but protective neural mechanisms limit output to prevent self-injury. Under extreme threat, these limits loosen. Motor neurons fire more intensely, recruiting additional muscle fibers. The increased force can cause later damage, such as tendon tears or joint injury, but in the moment, it allows actions like lifting heavy obstacles or rapid movement despite trauma. The same override affects perception of blood loss. Some trauma victims remain active despite severe hemorrhage because the brain narrows attention to immediate escape routes. Visual field may narrow, auditory input may dampen, and memory formation may fragment. The person operates in a simplified mode, focused only on essential movement. This state is often called shock in everyday language, but medically shock refers to circulatory failure. The neurological state is more accurately described as acute stress response. During this response, endorphins play a major role. These naturally produced opioids reduce pain transmission in the spinal cord and brain. Their effect can be profound enough that serious injuries feel minor or unnoticed. After safety returns and hormone levels fall, pain appears suddenly and intensely. The delay is not unusual, it is expected. Memory of the event is also altered. Many survivors report partial amnesia or distorted time perception. The hippocampus, responsible for forming detailed memories, receives less priority when resources are directed toward motor function. The brain records essential spatial information, but not full narrative experience. In evolutionary terms, this makes sense. Escaping a predator required rapid, coordinated movement, not reflection on injury severity. Some individuals remain capable of complex decision-making during this state. They navigate terrain, communicate instructions, or assist others despite personal injury. Functional brain imaging suggests that certain networks become highly focused while others quiet. The brain narrows itself to a survival configuration. Once danger passes, normal processing returns and the person becomes aware of damage that already existed. This emergency override can be life-saving but also dangerous. Without pain feedback, individuals may worsen injuries unknowingly. Continued movement on fractures or severe wounds can increase bleeding or structural damage. Yet, from an evolutionary perspective, immediate survival outweighed long-term tissue preservation. The body values escape over integrity. There are also cases where individuals with life-threatening injuries remained calm rather than panicked. Heart rate remained controlled, breathing steady, and decisions deliberate. This reaction appears counterintuitive, but reflects variation in stress hormone balance. Some nervous systems respond with focused clarity rather than chaotic arousal. Both responses serve survival. Rapid action suits sudden attack, calm reasoning suits complex escape. Research into combat and disaster survival shows trained individuals can enter the focused state more reliably. Training does not remove fear, but conditions the brain to channel arousal into organized behavior. The underlying mechanisms, however, exist in all humans. Pain is therefore not an absolute limiter of function. It is a signal the brain may suppress if circumstances demand movement. Extreme injury cases reveal that human capability depends heavily on context. The same body that collapses from minor injury in safety can operate under catastrophic damage during threat. The difference lies not in physical structure, but in neural control. The brain decides when the body stops. Chapter 3, Part B: Pain, Shock, and the Brain's Emergency Override. The emergency override does not only suppress pain, it alters the definition of effort. Under normal conditions, movement requires conscious coordination. The brain evaluates risk, balances energy cost, and limits exertion to sustainable levels. Muscles fatigue, breathing becomes uncomfortable, and the body signals the need to stop. These sensations protect tissues from overuse and prevent collapse. During acute threat, those regulatory limits are temporarily disabled. The brainstem and midbrain assume greater control over motor output, allowing rapid, repetitive action without the usual inhibitory feedback. Individuals have sprinted long distances immediately after injury or carried weight far beyond typical capability. Later examination often reveals severe structural damage that would normally prevent even standing. The body did not gain new strength, it removed restraint. This restraint normally exists because muscles and connective tissues can generate forces capable of injuring themselves. Tendons tear if overloaded, joints destabilize, and bones fracture under extreme contraction. The nervous system continuously limits muscle recruitment to prevent such outcomes. Survival emergencies temporarily reassign priority. Immediate escape outweighs future function. Biochemical changes reinforce this shift. Adrenaline increases calcium availability within muscle fibers, intensifying contraction force. Blood glucose rises rapidly as stored energy is released into circulation. Breathing deepens automatically, supporting sustained activity despite injury. The person experiences this as urgency rather than effort. Another effect appears in bleeding injuries. Normally, blood loss quickly weakens coordination and causes dizziness. Yet, some victims maintain motor function longer than expected. The explanation lies in vascular control. Peripheral circulation constricts dramatically, reducing flow to skin and extremities. This preserves pressure to the brain and heart even while total volume decreases. Movement continues until compensatory mechanisms fail. Witness reports often describe injured individuals appearing unaffected immediately after trauma, only to collapse minutes later. The delay represents the duration of the emergency state. Once the nervous system exits override mode, pain perception returns and blood pressure drops as vessels relax. The body transitions from survival action to injury response. Collapse is not sudden failure but postponed recognition. The brain also alters emotional processing during extreme events. Fear does not disappear, but it becomes focused. Instead of broad panic, attention narrows to actionable elements, exits, obstacles, and immediate threats. Neurochemically, the amygdala increases signal strength to motor planning regions while reducing input to reflective processing areas. The person acts first and understands later. In some cases, individuals with severe trauma assist others before seeking help themselves. From a rational perspective, this seems unlikely. Yet, group survival historically depended on cooperation. Evolution favored neural circuits that maintain social coordination even during injury. Helping behavior during crisis is therefore not purely moral choice, but partly biological pattern. Another striking feature is altered perception of time. Survivors frequently report events occurring in slow motion. This sensation corresponds to heightened sensory sampling by the brain. More environmental data is processed per moment, creating the impression that time expanded. The actual clock rate does not change, perception density does. This increased processing supports precise movement during chaotic situations. However, the override system has limits. If injury disrupts essential neural pathways or blood pressure falls below critical levels, consciousness fades regardless of adrenaline levels. The emergency state can extend capability but not indefinitely replace physiology. It is a temporary extension, not immunity. Medical responders sometimes observe patients remaining functional despite injuries incompatible with long survival. This does not contradict biological rules. It shows that the brain prioritizes immediate goals before structural failure becomes unavoidable. Once safe, the nervous system rapidly reverses the changes. Endorphin levels drop and pain floods awareness. Muscles tremble as energy stores deplete. Emotional reactions intensify because suppressed processing returns all at once. The person often feels exhaustion disproportionate to the duration of activity. The body repays the energy debt. This rebound phase can be as dangerous as the injury itself as blood pressure shifts and shock develops. Training influences how effectively the override operates. Repeated exposure to stress conditions the brain to enter controlled focus rather than disorganized panic. Military, rescue personnel, and athletes often demonstrate coordinated action under severe injury because practice patterns replace hesitation. Yet, the underlying mechanism remains universal. Humans possess an embedded emergency operating system. Pain is therefore not simply a measure of damage, but a variable signal modulated by context. The same injury can incapacitate in safety and be ignored in danger. The brain calculates survival value before allowing sensation to dominate behavior. These discoveries challenge intuitive assumptions about human limitation. Strength, endurance, and tolerance are not fixed traits, but adjustable parameters governed by neural priority. When life is threatened, the body reallocates every available resource toward continuation of movement. The cost is paid afterward in tissue damage, fatigue, and long recovery. But evolution favored organisms that could survive the moment even at the expense of future comfort. The emergency override reveals that the boundary of human capability is controlled less by muscle or bone and more by decision-making circuits deep within the brain. When those circuits determine survival requires action, the body obeys beyond ordinary limits. The modern human body appears fragile because most people live inside stable conditions. Temperature is regulated by buildings, water is available on demand, and oxygen levels rarely change. Under these circumstances, physiology seems narrow and delicate, yet outside controlled environments, human populations have survived in places that should exceed biological tolerance. The limits shift when exposure becomes constant. High altitude presents one of the clearest examples. As elevation increases, air pressure drops and oxygen molecules spread farther apart. Each breath delivers less oxygen to the bloodstream. For someone unaccustomed, the effect begins quickly. Headache, nausea, and confusion develop as the brain struggles to function. Climbing higher intensifies the problem until basic coordination fails. However, millions of people live permanently at altitudes where visitors struggle to remain conscious. Their survival does not depend on simple toughness. Their bodies operate differently. In some mountain populations, breathing remains deeper even at rest, increasing oxygen intake. Blood vessels in the lungs expand more efficiently, allowing improved transfer of oxygen into circulation. Over generations, genetic changes altered hemoglobin behavior, preventing excessive thickening of blood while still maintaining oxygen delivery. The heart also adapts. Instead of enlarging dangerously, it maintains steady output with reduced strain. These populations do not feel constant breathlessness because their baseline physiology has shifted to match the environment. The difference becomes obvious when lowland individuals ascend rapidly. They often produce too many red blood cells in response to thin air. Blood thickens, circulation slows, and headaches intensify. The adaptation meant to help becomes harmful because it is incomplete and temporary. Permanent residents display balance rather than exaggeration. Cold environments create a separate challenge. Heat loss in freezing air can lower core temperature below safe range quickly. Hypothermia impairs muscle coordination and thinking, eventually stopping the heart. Yet certain communities have lived in polar regions for thousands of years with minimal protective technology. Their bodies regulate circulation uniquely. Blood flow to hands and feet cycles between constriction and brief warming bursts, preventing tissue freezing while conserving heat. Metabolism produces more internal warmth without constant shivering. Body composition and diet also influence heat production, but physiological control plays the central role. These responses are subtle and continuous. They do not eliminate cold sensation, but prevent lethal cooling during prolonged exposure. Desert survival presents the opposite extreme. Instead of retaining heat, the body must release it while conserving water. Sweating cools efficiently but risks dehydration. Some populations display reduced salt loss in sweat and maintain hydration longer under high temperatures. Their circulation prioritizes skin cooling without collapsing blood pressure. Behavior and biology cooperate. Activity patterns shift toward cooler hours, yet physiological tolerance allows endurance in heat that incapacitates unacclimatized individuals. Caves and deep underground environments challenge perception rather than temperature. With minimal light and distorted spatial cues, the brain struggles to orient movement. Explorers trained in these spaces develop altered balance processing. The inner ear and visual systems recalibrate to limited input, preventing disorientation that could lead to injury. The body learns to trust different signals. These adaptations demonstrate that human physiology is not fixed at birth. Short-term exposure triggers partial adjustments, while lifelong residence shapes development and gene expression. Children raised in altitude or extreme climates develop lung capacity and circulation patterns matching their surroundings. Environment becomes instruction. Scientific measurements show that oxygen saturation, heart rate response, and metabolic efficiency vary widely across populations depending on historical habitat. There is no single normal human template. Instead, there is a range of configurations capable of supporting survival under very different physical conditions. When people from extreme environments move to moderate climates, many retain their adaptations for life. The body does not fully revert because development established stable regulatory patterns. The existence of these populations changes how human limits are defined. Laboratory tests on average individuals cannot represent species capability. They represent only those adapted to mild environments. Humans are not specialized for one place. They are generalists, capable of specializing when required. Extreme habitats reveal that survivability depends on regulation rather than resistance. The body adjusts breathing, circulation, and metabolism to fit external stress. These changes occur gradually, often unnoticed by the individuals themselves, yet they allow continuous life where sudden exposure would cause rapid failure. The same species that struggles after a day in thin air can live generations in it when given time to adapt. Adaptation does not always require generations. The body can begin changing within hours of exposure, though the process is incomplete and unstable at first. When a person enters high altitude, sensors in the kidneys detect reduced oxygen delivery. Hormones are released to stimulate red blood cell production. Within days, Oxygen carrying capacity increases. Breathing becomes deeper and more frequent. Capillaries in muscle tissue expand slightly, improving oxygen diffusion. These responses help but also strain the system. The heart works harder, sleep becomes irregular, and headaches appear because the adjustment is reactive rather than optimized. Over weeks, the body finds balance. Blood chemistry stabilizes, and energy production shifts to use oxygen more efficiently. Mitochondria adjust their activity, extracting more usable energy from less oxygen. The individual no longer feels constantly breathless. The environment has not changed, but perception of difficulty has. Heat acclimatization follows a similar pattern. After repeated exposure to high temperature, sweating begins earlier and becomes more diluted with salt. Plasma volume increases, maintaining circulation during fluid loss. Skin blood flow improves, allowing heat to dissipate without causing fainting. What once caused exhaustion becomes manageable labor. This transformation can reverse if exposure stops, demonstrating that the body continually updates its operating parameters based on experience. Cold adaptation also shows rapid change. Repeated immersion in cold water leads to reduced shivering and improved blood flow control to extremities. Instead of panicked breathing and muscle tension, the response becomes measured. Energy expenditure decreases, while core temperature remains stable longer. The nervous system learns not to overreact to the stimulus. The brain participates as much as the body. Anticipation alters reaction. Individuals accustomed to cold environments show smaller stress hormone surges when exposed, preventing rapid heat loss caused by uncontrolled breathing and movement. Isolation environments present a different stress. In polar stations and long cave expeditions, absence of daylight disrupts circadian rhythm. Hormone cycles drift, affecting sleep and mood. Over time, the brain establishes new timing patterns based on social cues and activity rather than sunlight. Melatonin release adjusts to artificial schedules, allowing sustained function without natural day-night cycles. Human biology expects regular environmental signals but can substitute alternatives when necessary. Hydration management in arid regions reveals further flexibility. With limited water intake, kidneys concentrate urine more effectively, reducing fluid loss. Hormones adjust thirst perception, preventing overconsumption when water becomes available and preserving reserves longer during scarcity. These changes protect circulation under dehydration conditions that would quickly debilitate an unacclimatized individual. Even nutrition adapts. Diets high in fat support cold climates by providing dense energy and internal heat production. Diets rich in carbohydrates assist high-altitude populations because glucose metabolism requires less oxygen than fat metabolism. The body does not merely endure environment, it selects fuel strategies suited to it. These physiological adjustments explain why extreme environments appear more hostile to visitors than to residents. The challenge is not absolute severity, but mismatch between conditions and internal regulation. The concept of a universal comfort zone is misleading. What feels unbearable to one person may be routine to another whose biology has recalibrated over years of exposure. Research comparing populations shows measurable differences in enzyme activity, lung structure, and circulation patterns linked directly to environment. These are not pathological deviations, but normal variations within the species. Human adaptability therefore operates on multiple time scales. Immediate reflexes handle sudden exposure. Short-term changes adjust over days to weeks. Developmental changes occur over childhood. Genetic selection shapes populations across generations. All four layers contribute to survival in places that appear incompatible with life. This layered flexibility reveals the underlying strategy of the species. Instead of evolving rigid specialization like many animals, humans evolved adjustable regulation. The body continuously measures external conditions and modifies internal function to maintain stability. Extreme environments do not break the human body. They force it to reveal its adjustable design. Where other species depend on narrow ecological niches, humans expand their niche by changing themselves. The same anatomy functions in frozen tundra, high mountains, deserts, and subterranean darkness, not through resistance alone, but through constant recalibration. Survival in impossible environments is not an exception. It is evidence of how the species was built. Physical survival depends on the body, but continued function depends on the mind. Consciousness organizes perception, decision-making, and coordinated action. Without it, survival behaviors lose direction. Yet, consciousness itself has limits, and under extreme conditions, the brain changes how awareness operates. Sleep is normally required every day. Without it, memory fails, reaction time slows, and emotional stability declines. The brain uses sleep to restore chemical balance and remove metabolic waste products accumulated during wakefulness. Depriving sleep gradually disrupts communication between brain regions. However, in crisis situations, people sometimes remain functional far longer than expected without rest. During disasters, long rescues, or prolonged travel, individuals have stayed awake for days while continuing purposeful activity. They experience slowed thinking and perceptual errors, but basic coordination persists. The brain reallocates processing power away from complex reasoning toward routine actions. Attention narrows, creativity declines, habit dominates behavior. After extended deprivation, hallucinations may appear. The brain fills sensory gaps with internally generated images and sounds. This is not purely malfunction, but compensation. Neural networks evolved to predict environment continuously. When incoming information becomes unreliable due to fatigue, prediction replaces perception. In survival contexts, this can be dangerous, yet people often recognize the distortions and continue functioning cautiously. The mind separates immediate movement from detailed interpretation. Isolation produces a related effect. In environments lacking normal social interaction or sensory variation, the brain increases internal activity. Individuals in polar expeditions or solitary confinement often report vivid imagery and altered sense of time. Minutes feel longer or shorter than actual duration. The brain constructs reality actively rather than recording it passively. These changes demonstrate that consciousness is adjustable. Under stable conditions, it prioritizes accuracy and detail. Under threat or deprivation, it prioritizes continuity of action, even if perception becomes imperfect. Extreme endurance activities provide controlled examples. Participants in multi-day events frequently report operating in an automatic state where movement continues with minimal deliberate thought. The motor system repeats practice patterns while higher awareness fades. Afterward, they recall little of the activity despite maintaining coordination. The brain reduces energy consumption by limiting reflective thinking. Stress hormones contribute to this shift. Elevated levels maintain alertness temporarily despite fatigue, but they also suppress memory formation. The individual remains awake yet detached from normal awareness. This state resembles a narrow corridor of consciousness, optimized for persistence rather than understanding. Prolonged darkness further alters perception. Without visual cues, internal rhythms drift. Some people develop a free-running sleep cycle slightly longer than 24 hours. Over weeks, the mind loses stable time reference, yet daily tasks can continue once a new rhythm stabilizes. The brain does not require precise external markers to function. It creates its own patterns when necessary. These phenomena challenge the assumption that clear awareness is required for survival behavior. Instead, the brain maintains multiple operating modes. Full consciousness supports planning and learning. Reduced consciousness supports repetition and endurance. In extreme conditions, the second mode dominates. Memory fragmentation often accompanies these states. Survivors recall isolated moments rather than continuous sequence. This occurs because the hippocampus, essential for forming new memories, receives less activity when resources are diverted to motor and sensory processing. The person lives through the event, but later possesses only partial narrative. Despite distortions, essential decisions often remain correct. Individuals navigate towards safety, avoid hazards, and maintain cooperation with others. The brain protects goal-directed behavior even while altering subjective experience. Consciousness therefore serves survival rather than the reverse. Its clarity is negotiable if reduced clarity allows longer function. Human mental endurance is not infinite. Eventually, failure occurs as chemical imbalance accumulates. Yet, the delay can be substantial enough to outlast immediate danger. The limits of consciousness are flexible boundaries rather than fixed edges. The mind can operate in simplified states for extended periods, preserving action while sacrificing detail. When the brain approaches exhaustion, it does not shut down all at once. Instead, it fragments activity into brief intervals of function and absence. These are called microsleeps. They may last only seconds, sometimes less, yet during them awareness disappears completely. Eyes may remain open and posture unchanged, while perception pauses. In everyday situations, microsleeps are dangerous because they interrupt attention. In survival situations, they can become a coping mechanism. The brain steals moments of recovery while maintaining overall wakefulness. Individuals operating under extreme fatigue may continue walking or performing simple actions while experiencing repeated gaps in awareness. Afterward, they remember discontinuous scenes rather than a continuous journey. The motor system can continue functioning because learned movement patterns require little conscious supervision. Walking, climbing, and repetitive tool use depend on circuits separate from reflective thought. The brain protects these circuits even as higher cognition fades. It preserves action first and comprehension second. Isolation intensifies this division. Without changing sensory input, the brain amplifies internal signals to maintain activity. People in featureless environments begin perceiving shapes, voices, or movement where none exist. These hallucinations are structured, not random. The brain attempts to maintain prediction models in absence of real data. Despite the unreality, many individuals recognize the source and adapt behavior accordingly. They trust touch and memory more than vision or sound. Survival becomes reliance on stable internal rules rather than immediate perception. Time perception also deteriorates. Without regular environmental markers, minutes and hours lose meaning. The brain measures time partly through events. When events become repetitive or absent, duration becomes uncertain. Individuals may believe long periods passed when only short intervals occurred, or the reverse. This distortion affects emotional regulation. Anxiety increases when time feels stalled, while detachment increases when time feels compressed. Yet routine actions can continue because they depend on sequence rather than duration. Extreme monotony leads the mind to reduce emotional intensity. A flattened emotional state conserves mental energy and prevents panic. Observers often describe survivors of prolonged isolation as calm or distant. This is not indifference, but adaptive dampening. Strong emotional reactions require energy the brain no longer wishes to spend. Another boundary appears in decision-making. Complex reasoning declines early during fatigue and deprivation. The brain shifts to rule-based thinking, relying on habits and training. This can produce mistakes in unfamiliar situations, but improves efficiency in practice tasks. Experienced individuals, therefore, function far better than novices under identical conditions because their responses are encoded in procedural memory. The mind replaces flexibility with reliability. Dream-like experiences may occur while awake. The boundary between imagination and perception weakens as sensory filtering changes. Some report conversations that never happened or movements they later realize they only planned mentally. Despite this, essential survival actions often remain intact because they rely on physical feedback rather than internal imagery. The brain preserves interaction with the environment even as internal experience becomes unstable. Recovery from these states often produces disorientation. Once rest returns and normal sensory input resumes, memories reassemble imperfectly. People reconstruct events using fragments and external information. This explains why accounts of extreme endurance can differ widely despite similar conditions. Consciousness is not a single steady state, but a spectrum of operational modes. At one end lies reflective awareness, at the other lies automatic persistence. Humans can move along this spectrum depending on necessity. The existence of these modes reveals an evolutionary priority. Continuing behavior matters more than accurate perception. An organism that moves toward shelter imperfectly survives more often than one that understands perfectly but stops moving. The limits of consciousness, therefore, mark not failure but adaptation. When clarity becomes too costly, the brain reduces it to preserve action. The mind becomes narrower, simpler, and more repetitive, yet remains effective enough to maintain survival until rest or rescue restores normal function. Human endurance depends as much on these altered mental states as on muscle or metabolism. Injury appears permanent at the moment it occurs. Bone breaks, tissue tears, nerves lose connection, movement stops because structure is disrupted. Yet the human body is not a static machine. After damage, it begins reconstruction immediately, and in some circumstances the repaired structure becomes stronger or functions differently than before. Healing is not simply restoration, it is adaptation. When a bone fractures, the initial response is inflammation. Blood vessels rupture and clot, forming a temporary internal cast called a hematoma. Cells then migrate into the region and begin producing collagen fibers that stabilize the break. Over weeks, these fibers mineralize into new bone. The remarkable detail is that the bone does not recreate its exact previous shape first. Instead, it forms excess material around the fracture, reinforcing the area before refining it. Later, the body removes unnecessary mass and reshapes the bone along lines of stress created by movement. The final structure reflects how it is used during recovery. This process explains why healed bones sometimes become denser at the fracture site. The body assumes repeated stress and prepares accordingly. Mechanical load guides reconstruction. Without movement, healing remains weak. With gradual stress, it strengthens. Muscle tissue follows a related pattern. After strain or tear, microscopic fibers rebuild thicker than before, provided nutrition and rest are adequate. Exercise intentionally exploits this principle. Training damages tissue in controlled amounts, and repair increases capacity. The body interprets repeated stress as a signal to upgrade durability. Adaptation emerges from injury signals. The nervous system shows even greater flexibility. For decades, scientists believed nerve cells could not regenerate meaningfully. Severe damage meant permanent loss of function. However, observation revealed partial recovery in certain injuries through a process called neuroplasticity. Undamaged neurons form new connections, rerouting signals around damaged regions. The original pathway does not return. A new pathway replaces it. Patients relearn movement through repetition, training the brain to assign functions to different areas. The process is slow and effortful because the brain must construct alternative circuits, but the outcome demonstrates that structure does not rigidly determine function. In some cases, sensory perception shifts entirely. Individuals losing sight in one region of the visual field may gradually use adjacent areas to interpret missing information. The brain fills gaps by reorganizing sensory maps. Skin regeneration offers another example. After significant damage, stem cells in deeper layers divide rapidly to replace lost surface cells. The repaired skin may lack certain features like hair follicles, but it restores barrier function. Over time, pigmentation and sensitivity partially return as nerve endings regrow into the area. Even the immune system adapts. After infection or injury, immune cells retain memory of the threat. Future responses become faster and stronger. This memory can persist for years, showing that recovery includes preparation for recurrence. Extreme endurance training illustrates cumulative adaptation. Repeated physical stress expands blood vessel networks in muscle, improves oxygen utilization, and alters energy storage. The body transforms its baseline capacity in response to repeated demand. Recovery therefore contains instruction. Damage informs the body how to change. These processes are not unlimited. Severe destruction can exceed regenerative capability, but within wide margins, the human organism is designed to remodel itself continuously. Each injury, illness, or strain becomes data guiding future structure. The implication is significant. Survival does not depend only on initial durability, but on capacity to reconfigure after harm. A fragile but adaptable system can outlast a strong but rigid one. Human physiology favors the adaptable model. Rebuilding does not occur uniformly across the body. Each tissue follows its own timetable and strategy, coordinated through chemical signaling. After major injury, hormones increase to mobilize resources. Energy use rises, appetite changes, and sleep patterns shift. The organism directs attention inward toward reconstruction. One of the most complex recoveries involves the brain after trauma. When a region loses function due to impact or oxygen deprivation, surrounding networks begin compensating. At first, movements are clumsy or absent because established circuits are broken. With repetition, alternate pathways strengthen. Connections that were once weak become primary routes for signal transmission. The process resembles learning from the beginning rather than repairing the old design. Children demonstrate this capacity dramatically. When injury affects a developing brain, other regions can assume roles normally assigned elsewhere. Language, movement, and perception may reorganize almost completely. Adults retain the same ability, but to a lesser degree, because specialization has become more fixed. Even so, gradual improvement can continue for years after initial damage. This long recovery reveals that the nervous system remains active in remodeling far beyond the initial healing phase. Cardiovascular tissue adapts under sustained strain. After repeated endurance effort, the heart enlarges slightly and pumps more efficiently per beat. Resting heart rate falls because circulation improves. Blood vessels become more elastic, reducing pressure during exertion. These changes are reversible if training stops, showing that the body maintains only what it needs. Excess capacity is expensive and therefore temporary unless reinforced. The lungs also remodel. Increased demand stimulates growth of capillary networks around air sacs, enhancing gas exchange. Breathing muscles strengthen, allowing deeper ventilation with less effort. What once caused exhaustion becomes sustainable activity. The respiratory system is not static plumbing, but living structure responding to workload. Bone responds similarly over longer periods. Regions exposed to frequent load thicken, while unused areas lose density. Astronauts in low gravity experience rapid bone thinning because mechanical signals disappear. Upon returning to normal gravity, gradual rebuilding occurs through targeted exercise. Structure follows requirement. The immune system records injuries in a different manner. After severe infection, populations of specialized cells persist, ready to respond faster in the future. Vaccination intentionally creates this memory without full disease. The body therefore learns from threat, storing biological knowledge in cellular form. Scar tissue represents both limitation and adaptation. It replaces destroyed tissue quickly to restore continuity, but lacks the flexibility of original structures. Over time, surrounding tissue adjusts movement patterns to compensate. Function returns through coordination rather than perfect reconstruction. The body accepts imperfection if it preserves capability. Repeated exposure to physical hardship can transform tolerance levels. Cold exposure enhances circulation control. High-altitude exposure alters oxygen processing. Strength training increases tendon stiffness. None of these changes occur instantly. They require cycles of damage followed by repair. Recovery is therefore not a passive waiting period. It is an active stage where the organism redesigns itself according to experience. Nutrition, rest, and gradual stress influence the outcome. Excessive stress prevents rebuilding and leads to degeneration. Insufficient stress leaves adaptation incomplete. The balance determines whether the body weakens or strengthens after injury. This balance explains why controlled training improves resilience, while uncontrolled trauma often causes long-term impairment. The biological mechanisms are similar, but intensity and timing differ. Human rebuilding capacity extends beyond individual tissues into coordinated systems. After prolonged illness, walking ability declines not only from muscle loss, but from reduced neural coordination. Rehabilitation restores patterns through repetition, integrating muscle, nerve, and perception again. Movement must be relearned as a whole behavior. The body therefore functions as a dynamic system, constantly rewriting its structure. Cells replace themselves, connections reform, and organs alter efficiency according to demand. Extreme cases reveal this most clearly because the starting damage is obvious. What appears miraculous recovery is often the visible outcome of ordinary processes operating at their highest intensity. Humans survive not because they avoid injury, but because they possess the capacity to redesign themselves after it. Each recovery leaves traces of experience embedded within tissue, altering future response. The organism that emerges is not identical to the one before the event. It is a modified version prepared for similar stress. Rebuilding is the continuation of survival by other means. Not all human extremes come from training, environment, or emergency response. Some originate before birth. Within the human population exist rare individuals whose bodies operate outside common biological ranges. These differences are not always visible, yet they demonstrate how flexible the species can be. Genetics determines the blueprint of cellular machinery. Most variation produces small differences, such as height or metabolism. Occasionally, however, a mutation alters a critical regulatory pathway. When the change remains compatible with life, it can create extraordinary capabilities. One such condition involves perception of pain. Pain normally protects the body by signaling injury. Without it, damage accumulates unnoticed. Yet, a small number of people are born with dramatically reduced pain sensation due to altered nerve signaling proteins. They can detect pressure and temperature, but experience little or no discomfort from injuries. In daily life, this creates risk. Cuts, fractures, and burns may go untreated because they do not trigger alarm. However, it also reveals how pain is not a direct measure of harm, but a neurological interpretation. The body can function structurally, while the brain receives minimal warning. The existence of these individuals shows that the threshold for suffering is adjustable within human biology. Other genetic variations influence endurance. Certain muscle fibers use oxygen more efficiently, delaying fatigue during prolonged activity. People carrying these variations often excel at sustained exertion with relatively low energy cost. Their bodies produce less lactic acid under effort, allowing longer performance before exhaustion. They are not immune to fatigue, but operate on a different scale. Cold tolerance offers another example. Variations in fat distribution and cellular metabolism enable some individuals to maintain core temperature in environments that quickly debilitate others. Their circulation balances heat retention and release more effectively, preventing rapid cooling of vital organs. These traits are rare but consistent across families, indicating inherited mechanisms rather than learned behavior. Resistance to disease also varies genetically. Certain immune system configurations recognize pathogens more efficiently or prevent infection entirely. These individuals may remain healthy during outbreaks affecting surrounding populations. The advantage often goes unnoticed until exposure reveals it. At the cellular level, repair efficiency differs as well. Some people's DNA repair enzymes correct damage faster, reducing long-term effects of radiation or toxins. The protective effect is partial, not absolute, but measurable. These outliers demonstrate that human limits are statistical averages rather than fixed boundaries. What appears impossible for most may be ordinary for a few because their regulatory systems operate differently. Evolutionarily, such variation benefits the species. In unpredictable environments, a population containing diverse traits is more likely to include survivors when conditions change. Extreme cold, disease, or food scarcity may eliminate many individuals, but spare those with advantageous differences. The species persists through variability. Studying genetic outliers helps scientists understand underlying mechanisms present in everyone at lower intensity. Pain suppression pathways exist in all humans, but are rarely fully inactive. Efficient oxygen use occurs during training, but begins at higher baseline levels in some individuals. These people are not separate from humanity. They are expressions of possibilities within it. The discovery of such variation shifts perspective on capability. Instead of a single definition of normal function, there exists a wide spectrum of functional configurations. Most fall near the center, yet the edges reveal potential responses under extreme pressure. Human resilience, therefore, includes both learned adaptation and inherited diversity. Genetic variation does not only produce advantages. Many extreme traits carry costs, and understanding those costs reveals how delicately balanced human biology is. Individuals with reduced pain perception, for example, often experience repeated injuries throughout life. Without discomfort to limit behavior, joints degrade and infections progress unnoticed. The trait demonstrates potential endurance, but also dependence on protective sensation. Survival requires awareness as much as resistance. Similarly, unusually dense bones can increase strength, yet reduce flexibility, making fractures more severe when they occur. Efficient oxygen use may come with higher energy demand during illness. Every biological change shifts multiple systems simultaneously. Extremes are trade-offs rather than perfection. Research into high-endurance genetics shows that metabolic efficiency sometimes reduces explosive strength. Muscle fibers optimized for sustained activity contract more slowly than those built for rapid force. A body specialized for distance is less suited to sudden acceleration. Variation distributes abilities across the population rather than maximizing all functions in one individual. This distribution reflects evolutionary strategy. A group containing different strengths adapts to more conditions than a uniform group. Some rare mutations enhance healing speed by increasing cellular growth signals. These individuals recover quickly from wounds, but face higher long-term cancer risk because the same growth processes can become uncontrolled. The boundary between repair and disease depends on precise regulation. Immune resistance offers another example. Certain immune configurations strongly attack pathogens, yet increase likelihood of autoimmune disorders where the body targets its own tissue. Protection against infection can come at the cost of internal stability. These patterns show that human extremes exist within a network of compromises. From a broader perspective, genetic outliers act as experiments performed by natural variation. Most changes disappear because they hinder survival. A few persist because their advantages outweigh disadvantages under specific conditions. Over generations, these traits may spread if environments favor them. High-altitude populations demonstrate this process. Mutations improving oxygen handling became common because they increased survival in thin air. In low-altitude environments, the same traits offer little advantage and therefore remain rare elsewhere. Human adaptability, therefore, arises from both immediate physiological response and long-term genetic diversity. One provides rapid adjustment within a lifetime, the other prepares future generations for conditions not yet encountered. Modern medicine increasingly studies these outliers to develop treatments. Understanding natural pain suppression pathways guides development of safer analgesics. Studying efficient oxygen metabolism informs therapies for respiratory disease. Observing unusual healing patterns inspires regenerative medicine research. Extreme individuals become maps to hidden biological options. The key insight is that no single body defines the species. Humanity consists of overlapping ranges of capability. Some tolerate cold exceptionally well. Others endure oxygen deprivation longer. Others resist infection more effectively. Together, these variations ensure that catastrophic conditions rarely affect all individuals equally. Survival operates at the level of populations, not just persons. Genetic outliers reveal the outer boundaries of what human biology can support. They demonstrate that the average person carries dormant versions of the same mechanisms expressed at moderate levels. Under training or stress, those mechanisms intensify but rarely reach the extremes seen in rare individuals. Human limitation is therefore partly perception. Observing the edges of variation expands understanding of what is biologically possible. When viewed separately, extreme survival, oxygen deprivation tolerance, pain suppression, environmental adaptation, altered consciousness, healing capacity, and genetic variation appear like unrelated phenomena. Together, they reveal a consistent pattern. Human biology is not optimized for comfort. It is optimized for unpredictability. Early human environments were unstable. Climate shifted rapidly across generations. Food sources moved or vanished. Predators competed for territory. Injury could occur far from shelter. Under these conditions, survival favored organisms capable of functioning while damaged, exhausted, cold, hungry, or deprived of air. Rather than specializing for a narrow niche, humans evolved regulatory flexibility. One major factor was endurance hunting. Instead of relying on speed alone, early humans pursued prey over long distances until the animal collapsed from overheating. This required sustained movement under fatigue and heat stress. The body adapted through efficient cooling via sweating, upright posture, reducing sun exposure, and the ability to maintain coordination while tired. Endurance demanded a brain capable of operating, despite discomfort. This capacity overlaps with the emergency override response. Pain, suppression, and narrowed attention allow continued movement when stopping would mean starvation. The same mechanisms that enable injured individuals to escape danger once helped hunters continue pursuit despite injury or fatigue. Group living reinforced these traits. Injured members could survive if they remained mobile long enough to return to others. Temporary function mattered more than perfect condition. Evolution, therefore, favored bodies that delayed collapse. The ability to tolerate oxygen deprivation may also relate to unpredictable environments. River crossings, sudden immersion, and physical struggle required brief periods without breathing. Individuals capable of maintaining consciousness slightly longer gained survival advantage. Over time, reflexes preserving oxygen became universal. Environmental adaptation shows the same strategy at larger scale. Humans spread into deserts, mountains, and cold regions not by developing entirely new anatomy, but by adjusting existing systems. Flexible regulation allowed migration without waiting for slow structural evolution. The brain's multiple consciousness states support persistence during long travel, night watch, or crisis. Clear perception is valuable, but not always essential. Continuing movement toward safety has greater survival value than understanding every detail of surroundings. Healing capacity completes the pattern. A species constantly exposed to injury benefits from rebuilding rather than replacement. Rapid regeneration allowed individuals to rejoin activity and contribute again to group survival. Genetic variation ensures that some members tolerate conditions others cannot. When environment shifts suddenly, at least part of the population remains suited to it. The species survives through diversity rather than uniform perfection. Taken together, these features describe an organism prepared for worst-case scenarios. Humans endure not by avoiding catastrophe, but by functioning during it. Modern stability hides this design. Controlled climate, predictable food supply, and medical intervention reduce exposure to extremes. As a result, the emergency systems appear abnormal when activated. In reality, they represent the original operating mode of the species. Human biology expects hardship. Comfort is the recent exception. The idea that humans are fragile comes largely from observing them in stable environments. Remove constant temperature control, continuous food supply, and immediate medical support, and a different pattern appears. The body begins activating systems rarely noticed in ordinary life. Circulation changes, perception narrows, metabolism shifts, and behavior becomes purposeful rather than comfortable. These reactions are not failures. They are default strategies waiting for activation. In evolutionary terms, the greatest threat to survival was unpredictability. A species specialized only for ideal conditions would disappear whenever those conditions changed. Instead, humans developed wide tolerances combined with behavioral flexibility. The brain could invent tools and social cooperation, but the body itself had to sustain function long enough for those solutions to work. Endurance, not peak performance, became the defining trait. Most predators rely on short bursts of speed or strength. Humans rely on persistence. Persistence requires surviving hunger between successful hunts, cold nights without shelter, and injuries without immediate treatment. Each physiological extreme explored in this documentary fits this pattern. Oxygen conservation prolongs consciousness during submersion. Pain suppression allows escape despite wounds. Altered mental states enable action through exhaustion. Tissue rebuilding restores function after damage. This difference explains why extreme cases appear miraculous. They are not violations of biology, but expressions of a rarely seen operating mode. Consider the relationship between awareness and function. Humans tend to believe that clear thinking governs survival, yet again and again survival occurs while awareness is fragmented. People act correctly without understanding, move without remembering, and persist without knowing how long they have done so. The brain protects behavior first and comprehension second. Knowledge can wait. Movement cannot. This principle appears across all extremes discussed. Oxygen deprivation triggers conservation before panic. Injury suppresses pain before immobility. Exhaustion simplifies thought before unconsciousness. Each time the mind sacrifices clarity to preserve action. In everyday life, this hierarchy is invisible because comfort allows all systems to operate simultaneously. Under threat, priorities reveal themselves. Another pattern emerges in recovery. Humans do not simply return to previous condition. They rebuild according to experience. Bone thickens where stress occurred. Neural pathways reroute around damage. Tolerance increases after exposure. The organism records hardship physically. Survival leaves a structural memory. This is important because it shows that resilience is cumulative. Each endured event changes future response. The species becomes durable not only through inheritance, but through lived experience encoded into tissue and behavior. Even genetic variation follows this logic. The population spreads its risks across many biological configurations. No single individual contains all strengths, but together the species covers many possible disasters. Some tolerate cold, others disease, others deprivation. Catastrophe rarely eliminates all strategies simultaneously. Human survival is therefore collective as much as individual. The adaptability of one generation prepares the next, while variation within a group ensures continuity during sudden change. Modern environments obscure this design. Constant safety encourages the belief that the body is fragile because it rarely needs to demonstrate otherwise. Yet when rare emergencies occur, ancient responses activate immediately without learning or preparation. They have been carried silently through thousands of years, waiting for moments that resemble ancestral conditions. The conclusion is not that humans are indestructible. They clearly are not. Rather, they are resistant to finality longer than expected. The organism stretches time between injury and death, between deprivation and failure. Within that stretched time exists opportunity for rescue, cooperation, or environmental change. Survival is not defined by avoiding danger. It is defined by extending possibility. After examining extremes, it becomes clear that human survival is less dramatic than stories suggest. It does not depend on heroic strength or extraordinary courage as much as on quiet biological patience. The body rarely defeats catastrophe directly. Instead, it delays defeat long enough for conditions to shift. This delay is the core advantage of the species. Every system described earlier functions by slowing failure. Cooling slows cell death. Oxygen conservation slows brain damage. Pain suppression slows behavioral collapse. Altered consciousness slows mental exhaustion. Healing slows structural decline. Genetic diversity slows extinction at the population level. None of these mechanisms eliminate danger. They stretch time. Time allows response. In nature, immediate perfection is less valuable than continued opportunity. A predator only needs to make one mistake to lose its meal. A storm only needs to weaken slightly for shelter to be reached. A wound only needs to remain survivable until assistance arrives. The body's purpose is to keep options open long enough for chance to intervene. Seen from this perspective, many human behaviors make sense. Cooperation, communication, and tool use all require the body to remain functional during stress. If the organism collapsed instantly under injury or fatigue, intelligence would offer little benefit. Biology had to provide endurance before culture could provide solutions. The relationship between mind and body therefore runs deeper than control. The mind plans, but the body buys time for plans to matter. Modern life often measures health by comfort and efficiency, yet these are not the conditions that shaped human physiology. The deeper standard is adaptability. A healthy organism is not one that never changes, but one that changes appropriately under pressure. The systems that feel disruptive during crisis are the same systems that preserve the species through unpredictable environments. This understanding alters the meaning of limitation. Limits exist, but they are elastic within ranges wider than daily experience suggests. The body contains layers of response that appear only when ordinary regulation is insufficient. What seems like extraordinary endurance is often the exposure of ordinary mechanisms operating at full intensity. Human beings are therefore not designed for ideal days. They are designed for the possibility that ideal days end without warning. The discoveries explored in this series reveal a consistent principle. Survival depends on maintaining function during uncertainty. The organism does not need to be the fastest, strongest, or smartest in every moment. It only needs to continue long enough for circumstances to change in its favor. In that persistence lies the defining feature of humanity.